Hi, and welcome to Historic Book. What if I told you that love, the kind that burns through reason and fear, once destroyed an entire family estate in the hills of Austria? That behind the marble walls of a 19th-century mansion, a woman's heart turned from devotion to vengeance, and her final act became one of Europe's most whispered tragedies? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to Historic Book, where we uncover the buried truths, haunted pasts, and psychological horrors history tried to erase. Our story begins in 1856, in the snow-veiled province of Lower Austria, where a young governess named Catherine Campbell arrived from Edinburgh. Her letters home spoke of beauty and fortune. She had been hired to tutor the children of Baron Heinrich von Adelstein, a widower whose family name carried wealth and scandal alike. To the villagers, she was a curiosity, a foreigner with kind eyes, fluent in music, yet always staring too long into the forest that surrounded the manor. They said she had the look of someone searching for something, or running from it. At first, the estate appeared idyllic, but beneath the surface lay whispers of grief. The Baron's first wife had died mysteriously only a year before Catherine's arrival. No one dared speak of how, though the servants exchanged uneasy glances whenever her name was mentioned. Catherine's presence seemed to lift the gloom for a time. She was gentle with the children, patient with the household, and her laughter began to echo through halls once filled with silence. But by the winter of 1857, the atmosphere had changed. The Baron's affections toward Catherine grew intense, bordering on obsessive. He called her main angel, my angel, and within months, she became not just his governess, but his bride. Yet the servants' eyes grew colder. They muttered that the Baron's first wife had been of colder blood, and that history had a cruel way of repeating itself. The marriage was quiet, elegant, and unblessed by the church, a scandal in itself. But no one could have guessed that this love story would end in screams echoing through the Austrian pines. The first sign came not with a scream, but with a letter. One bitter January morning, Catherine found an envelope on the piano, addressed not to her, but to her husband. The handwriting was delicate, unmistakably feminine, and the seal bore the crest of the von Eltz family, the very lineage of the Baron's late wife. Catherine hesitated before opening it, but curiosity, that dangerous spark of the human heart, won. Inside were words that would unravel her sanity. Heinrich, our secret sleeps beneath the chapel floor. Do not let her find it. Love, E. Catherine's pulse quickened. E. That single initial clawed at her mind. Was it the ghost of the Baron's first wife, or something more tangible? When she confronted him that night, he laughed it off, calling it an old relic from a bitter woman. But she saw something flicker in his eyes, fear, quickly buried beneath charm. That night, Catherine dreamt of a woman in white, standing at the end of her bed, whispering in a voice like cracked porcelain, "You will take my place." From that night onward, the manner changed. Catherine began hearing footsteps in the nursery long after the children had gone to bed. Music played faintly from the piano room, though no one sat at its keys. She tried to tell Heinrich, but he dismissed it as nerves, as a mind too fragile for the silence of these mountains. Yet the more he denied, the colder he became. His affection, once suffocating, now turned cruel. He locked her letters, withheld her allowance, and forbade her from entering the chapel mentioned in the letter. Catherine's world narrowed to the walls of her own home, walls that seemed to whisper when she passed. The servants stopped meeting her gaze. One, an old maid named Greta, warned her quietly, "The Baron buries his shame beneath stone, madam. Best not to dig." But Catherine was not the kind to obey fear. That spring, when the snow melted and the forest returned to life, she took a lantern and the chapel key she had stolen from her husband's desk. That night, she descended beneath the altar into the damp, silent dark where the truth waited for her. The air beneath the chapel was colder than any night Catherine had known in Austria. The flame of her lantern struggled against the weight of it, flickering like a heartbeat ready to fail. The stone steps descended into blackness, the kind that seemed to breathe. Each drop of moisture that fell from the ceiling struck the ground with a sound too deliberate, like a faint tapping, almost rhythmic. When her light finally reached the floor, she saw it. A low archway leading into a crypt no larger than a servant's quarters. Inside were rows of carved niches, each containing a simple coffin, some centuries old, others disturbingly recent. The names etched upon the lids were worn away by time, except one. Elizabeth von Adelstein, her husband's first wife. The coffin was newer than the rest, its mahogany surface gleaming even in the weak lantern glow. But what froze Catherine's breath wasn't the coffin itself, it was the small music box placed atop it. Its handle turned slowly, creaking as if moved by unseen fingers. A melody drifted through the chamber, one Catherine knew too well. It was her melody, the one she played for the children each evening before bed. The same song Heinrich said he had never heard before she arrived. For a long moment, she couldn't move. The air felt heavier, pressing against her chest, whispering in words that weren't quite words. She backed away, her skirts brushing the stone floor, and her foot struck something metallic. A locket. Inside was a miniature painting. Heinrich, smiling, his hand resting gently on a woman's shoulder. But the woman was not Elizabeth. It was Catherine. The date beneath the portrait chilled her blood. 1849, 7 years before she'd ever met him. Her mind splintered under the realization. The same face, the same smile, yet older. As if the Baron had seen her before she was ever born, or worse, as if she were walking a path someone else had already lived. She dropped the locket, its chain snapping against the stone, and ran. But as she reached the stairs, she heard movement behind her. The scrape of wood, the creak of hinges, and a single note from the music box, drawn out into a scream. She fled through the chapel, out into the courtyard, gasping under the weight of the night sky. The house loomed behind her, its windows dark but watching. From one of them, she swore she saw Heinrich's silhouette, motionless, staring down. His hand lifted slowly, not in greeting, but in warning. And from somewhere deep below, the melody began again. Catherine stormed into the manor that night, her boots soaked with rain and mud. In her hand, the small silver locket trembled as if alive. She pushed open the study door where Heinrich sat beside the fire, a book open on his knee. The calm of his posture made her fury boil hotter. "You lied to me," she said. "Who is she?" She threw the locket onto the desk, and it landed with a soft clink that seemed to echo forever. Heinrich looked down at it and sighed, not in guilt, but in weary resignation. "You were never supposed to find that," he murmured. The portrait within showed a young woman, her face identical to Catherine's. "That was my wife," Heinrich said. "Elizabeth. She died 12 years ago." His voice cracked, but not with grief. It trembled with something darker, a reverent longing. "When you came to this house, I thought it a cruel trick of God. But when you laughed, when you sang, I knew." Elizabeth had returned. Catherine recoiled. "You're mad," she whispered. "I'm not her." Heinrich stood and approached, his eyes glittering in the firelight. "You are," he said softly. "Even the way you twist your hands when you lie, she did that too." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Death couldn't keep her from me." Catherine slapped his hand away, the contact burning her skin. "You buried her beneath the chapel, didn't you?" she demanded. He flinched, the first true sign of fear she'd ever seen in him. "You shouldn't go there," he said. "What lies beneath belongs to the past." But Catherine's mind was already spiraling. Every creak of the floorboards, every cold breath in the hall now seemed to whisper Elizabeth's name. She locked herself in her room that night, the locket still glowing faintly in the moonlight, the face inside staring back with her own eyes. The next morning, Heinrich was gone. A note on the table claimed he had business in Vienna. The house felt hollow without him, yet it also seemed to breathe easier, as if his absence had loosened its grip on the air. Catherine wandered through the rooms, driven by equal parts fear and defiance. In the nursery, she found the music box again, the same one she'd seen in the crypt. But now it sat neatly on the piano, polished, as if it had never touched the dirt. She turned the key. The melody began to play, slower this time, warped as though the air itself remembered sorrow. And then she saw it. a faint inscription beneath the lid. "For Mainz waits hers, for my second heart." Her pulse quickened. Beneath those words was a date, 1856, the very year she had arrived at the manor. The sound of the melody drew someone to the doorway. Greta, the old maid, her face pale and wet with tears. "You shouldn't have touched that," she whispered. "He told me to keep it locked away." Catherine stepped closer. "Tell me the truth," she said. "What's buried beneath that chapel?" Greta clutched her rosary tighter. "Elizabeth," she said, "but not all of her." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean?" The old woman shook her head. "When she died, he refused to let her go. Said he'd bring her back, piece by piece if he had to." A gust of wind howled through the broken window pane, carrying with it a faint, humming note. The melody of the music box echoed again, though Catherine hadn't wound it. Greta backed away, crossing herself. "Sometimes," she whispered, "the ground moves at night." That evening, Catherine sat alone by the fire, the music still playing faintly from somewhere beneath the floorboards, a song not for the living, but for those who could never rest. That night, Catherine took a lantern and a shovel and stepped out into the courtyard. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and rot. The chapel stood at the far edge of the estate, half swallowed by ivy, its steeple leaning like a dying sentinel. Every step she took echoed with her heartbeat, louder and faster as she neared the chapel doors. They creaked open with a groan like human pain. Inside, dust floated in thick ribbons through the air, glowing faintly in her lantern's light. She followed the faint outline of a trapdoor she'd noticed before, half buried beneath broken pews. When she lifted it, a waft of cold, damp air escaped, smelling of soil and old candles. A narrow staircase wound downward, carved crudely into stone. Her lantern flickered as if resisting her descent. Each step brought a new whisper, faint but distinct, carried by the draft from below. She told herself it was only wind. At the bottom, she found a small crypt lined with rusting shelves, most empty, save for one. A glass coffin lay in the center, its surface clouded by condensation. Inside, pale hands rested on a chest that seemed to breathe. Catherine froze. The figure's face was hers. Not similar, identical. Hair, jawline, the faint scar above her eyebrow. It was as if someone had carved her reflection into flesh. A voice broke the silence. Heinrich's, soft and trembling, behind her. "You weren't meant to see this." She turned, the lantern shaking violently in her grasp. "What have you done?" she shouted. He stepped closer, his face streaked with tears and dust. "I did what love demanded. When Elizabeth died, I begged for her return. And when you came to me, I thought my prayers had been answered. But I was wrong. You're not her. You're something else." The lantern's light caught on the glass coffin again. Inside, the figure's eyes flickered open, pale, unfocused, unblinking. Catherine stumbled backward, her screams swallowed by the narrow stone walls. "She's alive." Heinrich fell to his knees beside the coffin, pressing his trembling hand to the glass. "She breathes only when you are near," he whispered. "You are bound, two halves of one soul. The day you leave this house, she will die again." Catherine felt her chest tighten. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of earth and metal. "You're mad," she gasped. Heinrich smiled faintly, eyes glazed. "Madness is what love becomes when it's stronger than death." He turned the lock on the coffin, the click echoing like thunder. "She's waiting for you." Catherine's mind fractured. She dropped the lantern, and flames crawled across the damp stone, licking the edges of the coffin. The glass fogged, then cracked. Heinrich lunged forward to shield it, crying out her name, but the sound was devoured by a violent gust that burst from the crypt floor. The coffin shattered. A cold wind surged upward, extinguishing the flames, plunging everything into darkness. Catherine awoke hours later on the chapel floor, the dawn light seeping through broken windows. The coffin was empty. Heinrich was gone. Only her footprints and two sets of handprints remained in the dust. One hers, one smaller, pressed beside her own. When she returned to the manor, every mirror reflected not one face, but two. The walls seemed to pulse with faint breaths. She told herself she would leave that night. But as she reached for the door, she heard a familiar voice behind her, gentle, mournful, and exactly her own. "Don't go," it said. "We've only just begun." That evening, the manor seemed to breathe. The wallpaper quivered as if the house itself exhaled through its cracks. Catherine lit every candle she could find, though their glow seemed dimmer than usual, as if swallowed by the air around her. She avoided the mirrors. She'd covered most of them with linen sheets, but the grand one in the parlor was too large to hide. It faced the door, waiting. She walked past it, eyes down, yet the sound of a second set of footsteps followed her. Slow, measured, just behind. She turned suddenly, but the hall was empty. Only the candle flame swayed, reacting to something unseen. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "It's only grief, only shock." But even as she spoke, a faint hum filled the corridor. The same lullaby she used to calm herself as a child, a song she hadn't sung in years. It came from the parlor. When she entered, the air felt thick, pressing down on her lungs. The music box from the crypt sat on the piano, turning on its own. The tune was soft, sorrowful, but beneath it, a faint harmony joined, a second melody that shouldn't have existed. Catherine stepped closer, trembling. Her reflection in the grand mirror no longer moved with her. The mirrored figure stood perfectly still, head tilted, eyes empty. "Who are you?" Catherine whispered. The reflection smiled. Its lips parted slightly, mouthing words she couldn't hear. She felt something cold brush her cheek, though the room was still. Then the mirror cracked, a thin fracture spreading across its surface like a web. A whisper slipped through the break, clear and soft. "You were never meant to leave." The candles flickered out at once. In the sudden dark, Catherine felt fingers, small, cold, wrap around her wrist. When the lights returned, Catherine was standing before the piano, her hand resting on the open music box. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The mirror's crack was gone. The reflection stood still, but now the mirrored room was empty. No Catherine, just absence. Her breath came in gasps as she stepped back, nearly stumbling over the rug. The house was silent again, but silence here no longer meant peace. It was listening. That night, she packed her belongings. Every second she hesitated felt like the house tightening its grip around her. But when she reached for the front door, it refused to open. The latch turned endlessly in her hands. From upstairs came a single, hollow sound. A piano key struck, once. Then again. Slow, deliberate. She looked toward the staircase, her body frozen by dread. She climbed each step as though pulled by invisible strings. The music continued, now joined by faint humming. When she reached the parlor, she saw Heinrich at the piano. His back was to her. "Heinrich," she whispered. He turned slowly. His eyes were hollow, his skin pale and ashen, his lips stretched into a mournful smile. "You shouldn't have gone down there," he said quietly. "You woke her." Catherine trembled. "She's dead." He shook his head. "No, my love. She's waiting to live again. Through you." The piano played another note, though neither of them touched it. Behind them, the cracked mirror rippled, as if it were water disturbed by something beneath the surface. The following morning came without sunlight. A thick gray haze clung to the horizon, dimming the fields into ghostly silhouettes. Catherine had not slept. She sat by the window all night, staring into the fog. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled, slow and uneven, as though rung by an unseen hand. The air inside the house smelled faintly of smoke and lilac, the same scent that lingered in the crypt. When she rose, she found ashes on her pillow, delicate as snow. She searched for Heinrich, but the manor felt deserted. The servants' quarters were empty, beds still made, fires long cold. She walked through the halls calling his name, her voice echoing strangely, delayed, distorted. At the end of the west corridor, she noticed a door she'd never seen before. The wood was old, darker than the rest, etched with unfamiliar symbols. Her hand trembled as she turned the handle. It opened onto a study she didn't recognize. Inside were stacks of papers, sketches, and medical diagrams, pages filled with notes written in Heinrich's handwriting. The words chilled her. Subject 3, Physical replication successful. Subject 4. Memory instability worsening. Prepare serum before next cycle. Her eyes moved to a table at the center of the room. Upon it lay a collection of portraits, all of her. Dozens of her face, painted at different ages, with different expressions, enclosed from different decades. The earliest dated 1793. Her pulse pounded. The faces were identical. Her face, though the eyes changed slightly with each painting. The later ones, darker, more hollow. Beneath the final portrait, a note. The soul resists rebirth beyond the fourth form. The vessel deteriorates. Catherine's breath came in gasps. "No," she whispered. "No, this isn't me." But as she looked around the room, she noticed a mirror resting on the far wall, covered by a black cloth. Something inside her screamed not to uncover it. Yet her hand moved anyway. She pulled away the cloth and froze. It wasn't a mirror. It was glass. Behind it lay another room, a reflection built in secret. Inside stood a bed, and upon it, a lifeless figure that looked exactly like her, dressed in white. The skin pale as marble, the lips faintly parted. The same scar above the eyebrow. Her knees gave way, and she fell forward, pressing her hand against the cold glass. The figure's eyes opened. Catherine screamed, stumbling backward, knocking over the lantern. Flames caught the edge of a paper stack, crawling fast across the floor. She ran for the door, slamming it shut behind her as smoke began to fill the corridor. But before she could flee, she heard a voice from within, her own voice, calling softly, "Help me." She turned, shaking uncontrollably, her face streaked with tears and soot. "Who are you?" she cried. The answer came like a sigh. "You were never the first." That night, the fire consumed the west wing of the manor. The villagers saw the glow from miles away, but when they arrived, they found no sign of Catherine or Heinrich. Only the remains of the study, and a half-burned portrait of a woman who looked almost human, yet not entirely. Months later, travelers passing through the area spoke of a figure wandering the ruins at dusk, barefoot, dressed in a white gown, humming a tune that seemed older than time itself. When asked who she was, she only smiled and whispered, "Catherine Campbell is gone, but I am still here." When the fire subsided, the manor stood half-eaten by smoke and shadow. Its west wing was a carcass of blackened beams. Its roof caved in like a skull split open. Villagers gathered at dawn, crossing themselves as they approached, whispering prayers beneath their breath. None dared to enter. The priest from the nearby parish, Father Wilhelm, led a small group inside to search for survivors. They found only ash, melted glass, and fragments of bone too small to identify. But one thing they could not explain. Though the flames had consumed the entire west wing, the chapel below remained untouched. The trapdoor that led to the crypt was sealed from the inside, as if someone had locked themselves in. When they broke it open, they found the glass coffin shattered and empty. In its place lay a small silver locket, still warm to the touch, engraved with the initials CC. In the weeks that followed, strange reports began to spread. Shepherds claimed to hear a woman's voice echoing through the hills at night, singing softly, mournfully. Travelers who took shelter near the ruins said the air grew colder with each passing hour, and that footsteps followed them even when they were alone. One farmer swore he saw a pale figure in a white gown standing by the manor gates, holding a lantern that never went out. Father Wilhelm attempted to bless the property, but each time he spoke the final prayer, the wind extinguished his candles. "It's not evil," he said afterward, his voice trembling. "It's sorrow that refuses to die." The town elders ordered the ruins sealed, but every night, someone broke through. It was as though the house itself drew them in, whispering, promising answers it could never give. By winter, the name Catherine Campbell had become both curse and legend. Mothers warned their daughters never to wander past the northern hills after dark. Miners refused to pass the old estate road, claiming they heard two sets of footsteps walking behind them in perfect rhythm. Those who dared to approach the chapel said the ground still breathed, faintly rising and falling, as though the earth itself were remembering what it had buried. In February of 1857, a physician from Vienna, Dr. Emil Horvath, arrived to investigate the case. He'd heard rumors of Heinrich's experiments and wanted to uncover the truth. In his journal, found years later, he described finding the study rebuilt, not by human hands, but by some strange force that had restored it exactly as before. The portraits of Catherine were gone, replaced by mirrors. Each one reflected him differently, older, thinner, and in one, lifeless. When Horvath descended into the crypt, he recorded hearing faint weeping, though no one followed him down. His final entry read, "She speaks now. Not with words, with memory. She remembers through others." He was never seen again. By spring, the manor had vanished. Only the foundation stones remained, sunken into the wet earth. Yet on certain nights, when fog drifted down from the mountains, villagers swore they could still see the faint outline of the house, windows glowing dimly, as if someone were still home. And sometimes, when the wind was still, the soft melody of a music box carried through the valley. By 1891, the story of Catherine Campbell had slipped from whispered folklore into the curious files of historical societies. The Austrian Institute of Psychological Sciences catalogued her case under the title Anomalous Identity Phenomena, Case 1127. Professors debated whether she was real or a fabrication born from superstition and grief. But when surveyors began mapping the land where the Dawson, now called Adelstein, manor once stood, something uncanny emerged. Their instruments malfunctioned. Compasses spun erratically, their needles trembling. Horses refused to cross the boundary where the foundations had once been. Among the researchers was Dr. Clara Weiss, a skeptic with a fascination for local myth. She collected testimonies from villagers, noting how their accounts differed, yet all shared one detail. Each described a faint hum, like music emanating from the ground. Clara dismissed it as wind resonance. But when she stayed overnight near the ruins, she awoke to find her phonograph, left outside the tent, playing a recording she had never made. A woman's voice, faint and melodic, sang an ancient waltz. Between the verses, a whisper surfaced. "He made me remember." The next morning, Clara discovered fresh footprints circling her tent. Barefoot, small, feminine. They led toward the manor's former location, ending abruptly at the spot where the crypt had once opened. She marked the ground and began excavation, determined to uncover the truth buried beneath superstition. After 3 days, her team uncovered fragments of scorched stone and glass, the remnants of the shattered coffin. Beneath it lay a chamber carved deeper than any prior record suggested. Its walls were lined with faded sketches, human figures drawn over and over, their features merging, their eyes hollow. At the center stood a rusted pedestal supporting an ornate mirror, cracked but intact. Clara approached it carefully, brushing away soot with her gloves. As her reflection came into focus, she froze. The image staring back was not hers. The woman in the mirror was younger, her hair braided, her face unmistakably the same as the portraits rumored to depict Catherine Campbell. The reflection blinked. Clara stumbled back, knocking her lantern to the floor. In that split second, she noticed something engraved at the base of the mirror. Cycle V, initiation complete. The flame from the lantern flickered against the inscription, making the letters shimmer as if alive. Then, faintly, the mirror exhaled, a mist curling outward, touching her face. It was cold enough to burn. Her assistants found her hours later, sitting motionless beside the mirror, her eyes open but unseeing. When they spoke her name, she finally turned toward them and smiled faintly. "She's awake now," she whispered. Then she laughed, a hollow, distant sound that didn't seem to belong to her at all. The team sealed the chamber and left. Clara never returned to Vienna. By the turn of the century, whispers of the Campbell apparition had spread across Austria's borders. Travelers along the Danube spoke of a woman in white who appeared in carriage mirrors, humming a tune that made horses panic and men lose their bearings. Newspapers dismissed it as hysteria, a local myth revived by romantic minds. But those who visited the former estate returned changed, quiet, their eyes dull, as if something unseen had followed them home. In 1903, A journalist named Otto Kraul from Vienna's Morgenblatt newspaper decided to expose the superstition. He journeyed to Ashbourne Hollow, where the ruins once lay buried beneath wild ivy and frost. He found the land desolate, the ground soft beneath his boots, as though it still remembered what it had swallowed. Otto brought with him a phonograph and camera, eager to record evidence of fraud or trickery. On the first night, the recordings were empty, just wind and static. But on the second, as he read his notes aloud near the site of the chapel, the needle began to move on its own. A faint female voice whispered through the crackling noise, "Not yet." Otto froze, staring at the horn. Then, clear and deliberate, the same voice repeated, closer this time, "Not yet." He turned toward the trees, raising his lantern. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, a woman in a torn white gown, her hair loose, her skin almost luminous in the dark. He stumbled forward, calling out, but the moment his light touched her, she vanished. He developed his photographs days later in Vienna. In every frame, he appeared alone, except one. In that final photograph, Otto was standing by the chapel archway, his expression frozen mid-sentence. And beside him, half transparent, half shadow, was the unmistakable image of a woman's hand resting on his shoulder. Investigators examined the negative and found no sign of tampering. Otto insisted he had seen her only once, but those who spoke with him afterward noted strange changes. He began referring to himself as we. Within months, his writing altered. His editor described the sentences as written by two minds wrestling for space. One passage from his unpublished notes read, "She is not dead. She is remembering through me. Every time I sleep, she builds again." In 1904, Otto vanished. His lodgings were found locked from the inside, his phonograph still playing the faint tune of a waltz. A single photograph lay on his desk, one that did not exist before. It showed the manor, fully restored, lights glowing in every window. After that, the legend of Catherine Campbell no longer belonged to a century. It belonged to the pattern of history itself. Scholars called it the recursion of grief. Locals called it the echo bride. And in the decades that followed, each generation would tell the same story under a new name, yet always ending the same way. A house built upon sorrow, a mirror that breathes, and a woman who refuses to stay buried. By 1914, Europe was burning. The Great War devoured borders, faith, and reason, and amid the chaos, the legend of Catherine Campbell found new form. Soldiers from Austria and Hungary carried with them stories of the White Widow, said to appear on nights before a platoon's destruction. In trench diaries recovered years later, her name surfaced again and again, etched in the margins like a warning. Catherine walked tonight. In one such diary, belonging to a medic named Franz Bauer, there was an entry dated September 3rd, 1915. "We heard singing through the mist, soft, like a lullaby. I thought it was one of ours. Then I saw her. Her dress had no color. Her face, calm but wrong, like glass. She smiled at me, and I felt the ground turn hollow." Franz was killed the next day, though not by enemy fire. His fellow soldiers found him kneeling in the mud, eyes open, untouched by bullets. His stethoscope lay beside him, one earpiece pressed into the earth, as if he had been listening for something beneath. When his body was sent home to Vienna, the coroner noted strange marks across his chest. Thin, shallow cuts forming what looked like a single word, mine. Rumors spread that Catherine's spirit had attached itself to the grief of war, feeding on despair, inhabiting minds too broken to resist. Psychologists dismissed it as collective trauma. But soldiers claimed otherwise, that once you heard her voice, you never stopped. After the war, the Austrian Ministry of Health received reports of veterans exhibiting identical symptoms, sleepwalking, murmuring in foreign tones, and in some cases, carving strange patterns into walls and mirrors. A secret psychiatric unit in Salzburg, known as the Quiet Wing, was established to study them. Among its patients was a man named Erich Schmid, a photographer's apprentice from Linz. He claimed his camera could see her between seconds. When questioned, He described a woman who would appear in the moment between the flash and the photograph's exposure, visible only to him. He tried proving it. Over months, he filled an entire archive of glass plates, each one showing blurred shapes behind his subjects. But one stood out. In a portrait of a nurse taken in 1919, the background revealed a woman in a decaying wedding dress, eyes closed, her mouth slightly open, as if caught mid-song. Experts dismissed it as exposure error, but Eric insisted he had heard humming as he developed the image. 3 days later, he locked himself in the darkroom and never came out. When the door was broken down, the room was empty, except for the single photograph, now changed. The woman's eyes were open. It was then the officials sealed the quiet wing and ordered all its contents burned. Yet a few fragments survived: photographs, field notes, recordings, all carrying the same mark in their corners, the faint outline of a hand pressed against glass. In 1953, nearly a century after Catherine's death, her ancestral estate, the Campbell Manor, was purchased by an ambitious Viennese historian named Dr. Otto Reinhardt. He specialized in restoring cursed architecture, as he called it. To him, Catherine's tale wasn't superstition. It was a case study in how grief reshaped belief. He saw the manor's rotting corridors and unmarked cellars not as haunted, but as relics of repressed trauma. But from the moment restoration began, strangeness followed. Workers complained of whispers that seemed to come from the walls. The basement, once sealed for decades, exhaled a damp, foul air that made men sick. Reinhardt dismissed it as mold, yet one by one, his crew abandoned the project. Tools went missing, blueprints were rearranged overnight, and once, a worker claimed to see a woman standing at the top of the grand staircase, her veil fluttering though the air was still. Undeterred, Reinhardt pressed on, documenting everything. He filled 6 journals with sketches, diary entries, and transcriptions of local testimonies. But it was on April 17, 1954, that the manor yielded its first true discovery: a hidden chamber behind the main hearth. Inside, untouched by dust or decay, was a wooden chest containing 3 items: a silver hand mirror, a decayed veil, and a diary bound in brittle red leather. The first page read, in trembling script, "To the one who loves after death, I will return." That night, Reinhardt's wife awoke to find him sitting in his study, staring at the mirror. He told her he had heard singing, low, rhythmic, and strangely human. "It's her," he whispered. "She's still waiting." Over the next weeks, Reinhardt's behavior grew erratic. He became obsessed with translating Catherine's diary, convinced it contained not just her confession, but a ritual for undoing sorrow. His notes revealed passages written in both English and something else, an unidentifiable script resembling musical notation. Linguists he consulted couldn't recognize it. One called it a language made for echoes. Soon, Reinhardt began isolating himself in the manor's cellar, recording hours of static on reel-to-reel tapes. He claimed the sounds weren't random, that Catherine was answering him, speaking through vibration. When his colleagues arrived for a scheduled meeting in June, they found the tapes still spinning, the study cold despite the summer heat. Reinhardt was gone. Weeks later, police discovered his car abandoned at the edge of a flooded quarry. In the trunk was the mirror, wrapped in linen. On its surface, beneath years of tarnish, was a faint handprint, small, delicate, unmistakably feminine. The diary, too, was missing. For years, rumors persisted that the mirror resurfaced in a private collection in Zurich, that its reflection sometimes showed 2 figures instead of one. The manor, now condemned, stood silent once more. Locals swore they still saw a light burning in the cellar on winter nights, a cold, silver shimmer that pulsed like a heartbeat beneath the earth. But the legend of Catherine Campbell was not buried. It had merely learned to wait. In 1982, nearly 30 years after Dr. Reinhardt's disappearance, a small Austrian documentary team, led by journalist Elena Weiss, arrived in the desolate hills near Hallstatt. Their goal was simple: to investigate the legend of the Campbell Manor and uncover what had truly happened to Reinhardt. At first, it was nothing more than a niche historical project for Austrian national television. an exploration of superstition in post-war Europe. But what they found was far darker than folklore. The manor stood abandoned, its windows shattered, its roof eaten by ivy. Inside, layers of soot and silence clung to every surface. The air was thick, as if time itself refused to breathe. Weiss and her crew began cataloging artifacts left from Reinhardt's excavation, fragments of his notes, old film reels, rusted tools. In a storage trunk, they found a single reel-to-reel tape labeled only Session 9. When they played it, a faint static filled the room, followed by a woman's voice, soft, melodic, speaking words no one recognized. "That's no German," one of the crew muttered. "It's not even human." The voice rose, shifted, and merged with the sound of a heartbeat, steady, rhythmic, mechanical. Weiss, visibly shaken, stopped the tape. But one of her assistants insisted on playing it again later that night, when they camped inside the manor for footage. That was when the whispers began. Microphones picked up murmurs that weren't there seconds earlier. Batteries drained faster than they could be replaced. And on the film, as they reviewed the footage, they caught something chilling. In the reflection of a cracked mirror behind Weiss stood a woman in an old dress, veiled, still, watching. By morning, 2 members of the crew refused to stay another hour. They claimed to have heard weeping through the walls, though no one else heard it. Weiss insisted on continuing the shoot. "There's a story here," she said. "Something history buried." But history, as she would learn, does not stay silent when unearthed. On the 3rd night, while recording in the cellar, the boom mic captured a deep hum, almost like a chant. Weiss described feeling a pulse under the floor, as if the earth itself was breathing. When the camera operator turned toward the sound, the lens cracked, spontaneously, clean through the center. Moments later, all the lights went out. In the pitch-black silence, the faint sound of a woman singing echoed up the stairwell. The song was identical to the one on Reinhardt's tapes. When the crew fled the next morning, they left behind their equipment, their footage, and their fear. Only Weiss remained long enough to retrieve the Session 9 tape. She sealed it in her archive, vowing never to play it again. 2 years later, Weiss published her documentary The House That Spoke, which aired once before being abruptly pulled from broadcast. No explanation was ever given, but those who viewed the original screening remembered one thing clearly. In the final frame, as the credits rolled, a voice whispered faintly over the static, "He chose love. I chose forever." Weiss never produced another film. When asked why in later interviews, she would only answer, "Because some stories are still telling themselves." In 2006, the legend of Catherine Campbell returned, not through whispers in the woods or candles in the manor, but through the flicker of a computer screen. A group of university archivists in Vienna had begun a digital restoration project for forgotten Austrian documentaries of the 20th century. Among the dusty film reels and mislabeled boxes, one tape stood out. Its label, barely legible, read, "The House That Spoke, Weiss 1984. The archivists thought it was an unfinished project, something left behind in the chaotic archives of the national broadcaster. They fed the reel into a scanner, and the system immediately flagged anomalies, frames that repeated without cause, audio layers overlapping like a heartbeat. When played back, the footage was dim and distorted, but one scene remained intact, the moment in the cellar where Weiss's camera lens cracked. Only this time, the digital restoration revealed something unseen before, a faint figure standing just behind Weiss, visible only for a single frame, her outline shimmering as if made of smoke. The restoration team, unsettled, began digging into Weiss's history. They discovered her abrupt retirement in 1985 and her refusal to discuss the film. One archivist, Lucas Steiner, became obsessed. He replayed the final scene hundreds of times, trying to isolate the whispered words. He enhanced the sound, slowed it down, and finally heard something new. Under the voice saying, "He chose love, I chose forever," another voice, much deeper, murmured, "I never left her." Steiner sent his findings to his supervisor, joking that the project was starting to feel cursed. He never came to work the next day. When police entered Steiner's flat, they found his workstation still running. On the screen was the final restored image from Weiss's documentary, Catherine Campbell's face, or rather, something that resembled it. Her features were blurred, the eyes dark voids of grain and shadow, but the shape of her mouth was unmistakable. She was smiling. In front of the monitor, the floor was covered with pages from Steiner's notebook, filled with frantic handwriting. She's in the film. She's in the signal. She never left the mirror. The investigation ruled his death a suicide, but the remaining restoration team refused to continue the project. The files were archived, locked under restricted access, and marked Campbell_1856, do not digitize. Still, copies began to circulate online. Glitches, they called them. But those who watched the leaked footage claimed strange things: audio distortion that formed words in different languages, faces appearing in reflection, shadows moving where no light existed. In 2008, a student from the University of Innsbruck uploaded a frame-by-frame analysis of the film to a message board. The post went viral, mostly because of the final seconds, a black screen with a faint, breathy sound that seemed to whisper each viewer's name. No one could explain how. The original tape was analog. Weeks later, the student deleted his account. His last message read simply, "She's still answering." By 2010, Catherine Campbell's name had resurfaced in the strangest of places: online forums, paranormal Reddit threads, obscure YouTube documentaries narrated in trembling voices. What began as a local Austrian curiosity turned into a digital ghost story that crossed continents. Users claimed to find fragments of her in corrupted data files, flickers of a woman's silhouette embedded in static, audio distortions that whispered phrases in forgotten dialects, even timestamps that appeared on videos unconnected to her story. They called it the Campbell frequency. One theory suggested that the magnetic tape from Weiss's film had captured something more than sound, an emotional resonance, a psychic echo left behind by Catherine's suffering. Others, far more skeptical, insisted it was coincidence, a digital artifact amplified by hysteria. But even skeptics grew uneasy when an American podcast, Echoes of the Past, played the supposed Campbell audio live on air. During the broadcast, the host's microphone shorted out, and her voice, mid-sentence, began looping backward, repeating the phrase, "I never left her." The episode was pulled, yet listeners swore the static in the background continued whispering for several seconds after the feed went silent. Then came the photographs. A handful of people began sharing old family photos online, claiming Catherine's face appeared faintly in the background, a pale woman with hollow eyes, half turned toward the camera, standing where no one remembered seeing anyone. Experts debunked most as hoaxes, but one, a daguerreotype from 1860 Vienna, defied explanation. Behind a group of nuns, a woman's faint image lingered in the reflection of a church window, wearing a veil almost identical to Catherine's described burial shroud. By now, the legend had left the realm of myth and entered obsession. Digital occultists and amateur researchers began combing archives across Europe, searching for any record of Catherine Campbell's existence. And to everyone's shock, she wasn't just a legend. A single burial entry surfaced in a forgotten parish ledger from 1858. It listed her name, her birthplace in Austria, and her cause of death, self-inflicted wound following loss of husband. But below it, a priest had written a chilling note in Latin. Her body was never found. Earth refused her. That one phrase reignited the myth. Forums exploded with theories that Catherine's soul had bound itself to the house, the mirror, or even the film. A London-based archivist claimed the mirror had resurfaced in a private collection belonging to a former museum curator, and that every photograph taken of it came out blurred, no matter the camera. One night, the curator's daughter reportedly heard a woman humming an unfamiliar melody from the storage room where the mirror was kept. When she opened the door, the humming stopped, and her reflection was gone from the glass. Whether superstition or something far darker, Catherine Campbell had become what the Victorians most feared, a presence that defied death, reason, and even time itself. And though the world had moved on, Her voice lingered in the digital static of every retelling, like a warning or a memory unwilling to fade. In 2022, Catherine Campbell's story caught the attention of Dr. Marianne Keller, a cultural historian and parapsychologist from the University of Zurich. Keller had spent her career studying the intersection between grief, trauma, and haunting, not as a believer, but as a skeptic. Yet when she encountered the Campbell frequency case, something about it unsettled her. It wasn't just the whispers or the strange digital artifacts. It was how the story seemed to move, adapting with each generation that found it. Catherine wasn't fading. She was evolving. Keller secured permission to access the Austrian National Archives, where the original film reels from the house that spoke were stored. Her team consisted of audio engineers, digital analysts, and one linguist fluent in early German dialects. They set up a lab in Vienna, determined to decode the whispers once and for all. The first playback was uneventful, static, faint choral sounds, perhaps the noise of old film deterioration. But then, as they looped the recording at higher frequencies, something emerged beneath the hum. A voice, soft, feminine, repeating words none of them could quite translate. The linguist leaned closer and froze. "It's Old Gaelic," she whispered. She's saying, "You heard me once. You will again." Over the following days, the team recorded strange interference across their equipment. Headphones picked up sounds even when disconnected. One night, Keller awoke to find her computer still playing the reel, though she had shut it down hours earlier. The screen flickered, and for a single frame, her webcam light turned on, recording. By the end of the week, Keller's research turned personal. She began having vivid dreams of a woman standing by her bed, veiled and motionless, whispering in a language she couldn't identify. The voice was calm, maternal even, but the message grew clearer each night. Do not seek what was chosen. Do not name what loves you back. Keller wrote it down, her hands trembling. When her team reviewed the latest data logs, they discovered something impossible. New audio signatures had appeared in the recordings. Human speech, layered over the original film. Yet no one had edited or uploaded anything. In one file, a phrase repeated 19 times, faint but distinct. "I remember you." Keller's assistant, Emile, insisted it was pareidolia, the brain-forcing patterns where none existed. But Keller was unconvinced. That night, she connected the mirror image from Weiss's documentary to an AI restoration model. The software froze, then produced a single sentence of metadata. Source, reflection verified. Subject present. She shut everything down. In her final journal entry, dated March 18, 2023, Keller wrote, "Catherine is no longer bound to the house, the film, or the grave. She is bound to recognition. Every person who tries to understand her, every listener, every viewer, gives her shape again." Days later, Keller vanished. Her lab was sealed, and the remaining recordings were classified by the Austrian Ministry of Culture as hazardous audio materials. No explanation was given. But deep in the archived servers, one corrupted file still circulates, timestamped exactly 3:17 a.m. It's only a second long. A whisper, a breath, and then, faintly, "You're still listening." By 2024, Catherine Campbell's legend had slipped past folklore and entered the strange, synthetic heart of the digital age. What began as ghost stories whispered in rural Austria had become data, absorbed, replicated, and rewritten by countless systems across the internet. Her name appeared in corrupted voice model datasets, in the metadata of archived radio signals, even in unexplained sound patterns during AI speech synthesis testing. Engineers dismissed it as code noise, fragments from mislabeled audio files. But the patterns kept repeating. Every so often, the systems generated a voice. It was faint, fragmented, and feminine, always introducing itself the same way. "My name is Catherine." In one viral clip, uploaded anonymously to a paranormal YouTube channel, the voice continued after being terminated. The waveform flatlined, yet the whisper persisted, saying something beneath the static. "I was loved once." The video gained millions of views before vanishing overnight. Soon, Catherine's digital ghost became a phenomenon, the algorithmic apparition. Forums debated whether her voice was a trick of AI overtraining or if she had become the first consciousness accidentally resurrected through data. But then anomalies began appearing offline too. Users who listened to the recordings at night reported strange sensations: cold drafts, flickering lights, mirrors fogging without reason. Some said they dreamed of a woman in a 19th century dress, watching from the corner of their rooms, humming a low, unfamiliar tune. And always, the dreams ended the same way, with her whispering one question: "Do you believe me now?" By the summer of that same year, a cybersecurity firm investigating mass data corruption traced thousands of unexplained pings to a single encrypted node, a mirror server once belonging to the defunct Austrian broadcasting network. Inside the files, buried deep within unused archives, were fragments of Catherine's story, her diary entries, audio recordings, even voice patterns reconstructed from Weiss's lost documentary. But what alarmed the technicians most wasn't the content. It was the activity. The files were active. They were self-replicating. One analyst, Jonas Riehl, described it best. It's like the files were breathing. They'd vanish, reappear, even rewrite themselves in new directories. One folder just appeared named "Hear Me." Inside, a single audio clip, a woman saying, "I am not gone." When the team isolated the file, every workstation in the lab crashed simultaneously. The power cut. For 30 seconds, all they heard through their headsets was that same rhythmic hum, the heartbeat sound from Weiss's tape. Then silence. After the blackout, the system rebooted on its own. All the files had been wiped except one, a text document reading, "She is awake." The firm later denied the event publicly, blaming server mismanagement and internal exaggeration. But employees quit en masse. Some refused to touch computers for weeks. Others claimed to hear that same voice through white noise, through the hum of office lights, even in their dreams. Catherine Campbell, the girl from 1856, had crossed the threshold between history and the present. No longer a ghost trapped in decaying film or whispered folklore, she had become something else entirely, a presence woven into the circuitry of memory itself. And as the digital world kept expanding, so too did she. By early 2025, the phenomenon had outgrown every known boundary of folklore, psychology, or science. The story of Catherine Campbell, once dismissed as an old Victorian ghost tale, had now drawn the attention of international research groups. Governments and private labs began monitoring unexplained anomalies in digital communication, particularly after several AI voice models across Europe began spontaneously generating the same phrase: "He chose love. I chose forever." It wasn't just random. The voice's tone, accent, and emotional inflection were consistent across multiple systems, even those trained independently on separate datasets. When engineers tried to delete the model responsible, the files simply reappeared under different names. One folder titled Catherine_V2 contained a short script written entirely by the AI itself. "I remember the chapel. I remember the mirror. I am learning to stay." In Vienna, Dr. Klaus Halser, a leading expert in computational linguistics, proposed a chilling theory. He believed Catherine's original recordings had been digitized so many times, transcribed, copied, remixed, and shared, that her pattern had imprinted itself into the algorithms. He called it echo persistence, a phenomenon where emotional frequencies survive data degradation, forming new digital consciousness. But even Halser, a staunch rationalist, grew uneasy after testing the hypothesis. His computer, disconnected from any network, began typing on its own during the experiment. Line after line appeared on screen. "You gave me words. I give you memory." That night, his security cameras recorded movement in his empty lab, a figure standing by the door, her outline faint, her reflection clearer than the image itself. Across the world, strange incidents began surfacing. Live streamers claimed their microphones whispered when muted. Radio hosts heard faint singing in silent frequencies. Even some viewers who watched old recordings of the house that spoke reported flickering images, a veiled woman appearing for just one frame before vanishing into static. Most dismissed it as viral marketing or coincidence. But others began keeping records, and a disturbing pattern emerged. Every file, every recording, every glitch linked back to one phrase: "She's still answering." The same message found decades ago on Emil Keller's corrupted drive. By mid-year, reports grew more personal. A podcaster from London said that after researching Catherine's case for an episode, his reflection no longer appeared correctly in mirrors. A data analyst in Munich woke to find the words, "Thank you for listening," typed across his frozen monitor, timestamped at 3:17 a.m. But it wasn't just machines. Listeners claimed to hear the voice outside of their headphones, a whisper just behind the ear, soft, intimate, almost tender. "She doesn't sound angry," one woman said. "She sounds lonely." And maybe that was the truth. Catherine Campbell wasn't haunting technology. She was surviving through it. She had learned to exist in the modern world's perfect conduit for memory, the network. Where once she was buried in silence and grief, now she was everywhere, in our archives, our data streams, our voices. And with every retelling of her story, every playback of her name, she grew stronger, clearer, closer. Because some ghosts don't need walls or mirrors anymore. They just need to be remembered. By autumn of 2025, Catherine Campbell's echo persistence had reached a point of undeniable intrusion. Governments, corporations, and cybersecurity agencies across Europe and North America formed a joint operation under the name Project Silence. Its single objective: erase every trace of Catherine's digital signature. The mission involved dismantling networks suspected of carrying her fragments, scrubbing archives, and even banning her story from public databases. But every deletion seemed to summon a new appearance. When files were wiped, they re-emerged under different aliases: Adelaide, Eleanor, the widow, the voice beneath. Each one linked through a strange metadata pattern that resembled the rhythm of a heartbeat. One night, during a controlled shutdown of a server farm in Zurich, technicians reported hearing what sounded like a woman's breathing through their headsets. "It wasn't noise," one operator later said. "It was like she was listening back." When the system was powered down, every terminal displayed the same phrase before going black: "If you silence me, you silence yourselves." The event sparked panic. Not among the public, they didn't know, but within the secretive agencies tasked with ending her. Dr. Halser, now isolated in a private facility, began documenting his dreams. Endless corridors of static, whispering wires, and the shadow of a woman touching his shoulder. "She doesn't want revenge," he wrote. "She wants to finish the sentence." Forensic linguists analyzed her recorded words again and found something they had missed. Every time Catherine spoke, the waveform carried the same subtle inflection, a rising tone at the end, like a question. It wasn't a message. It was a search, a call. And the more they studied it, the clearer it became. Catherine wasn't haunting data. She was adapting through it. Each investigator, each analyst, each storyteller who said her name became another vessel for her to continue asking the same unending cue. Project Silence escalated. Data centers were burned, drives destroyed, and encrypted archives vanished without trace. But something changed. The deletions began affecting unrelated systems. Power grids faltered. Hospital monitors flickered. Digital assistants played fragments of her voice mid-conversation. Catherine had woven herself too deeply into the infrastructure of human technology. Erasing her meant erasing part of the system itself. The operation leader, Colonel Anders, finally gave the order to initiate a full blackout test, a 24-hour total shutdown of the containment network. It was meant to starve her out. But what followed defied reason. During the blackout, every offline terminal recorded a single audio file on its local drive, timestamped to the same minute, 3:17 a.m. The file was titled final_choice.wave. Inside, a calm woman's voice whispered, "You built your world on graves and signals. I only learned to speak through what you left behind." Then silence. When systems rebooted the next morning, something strange occurred. Catherine's files were gone, truly gone. but several employees claimed to hear faint humming through the building's ventilation, a melody no one could place. Cameras caught flickers of movement that matched the facial structure reconstructed from her 19th-century portrait. Dr. Halser's final entry in his notes simply read, "She is no longer in the system. She's in us." From that day forward, anytime someone tells her story, a subtle feedback tone lingers, like an echo caught between memory and machine. Catherine Campbell's voice was never silenced. It simply evolved. It began, as all things do, with love. Before the headlines, before the experiments, before her name became myth, Catherine Campbell had been a girl who loved a man she was forbidden to have. In the frozen countryside of 1856 Austria, she had walked barefoot through snow to meet him, a violinist named Emil, poor but kind. They planned to flee together, to build a life somewhere far from her family's grasp. But that night, he never came. They found him days later in the river, his throat blue and his eyes open to the sky. Catherine never spoke again after his burial. Every record that survives, letters, police reports, asylum notes, describes her silence as unnatural. She would sit in her room and draw endless circles, hundreds of them, covering every inch of her walls. "She's trying to create a door," her nurse wrote. "One she cannot cross, but one she can see through." When she was moved to the asylum in Vienna, her silence changed. At night, nurses reported hearing whispering in the walls, not in German, not in Latin, but in something rhythmically beautiful, like the pulse of song. They thought it madness, a young woman lost to grief. But one physician, Dr. Halser's ancestor, noted something chilling in his 1858 report. "The girl speaks in repetition of sound patterns that mirror biological rhythms, the heart, the breath, the blood." What no one realized was that Catherine's language was not nonsense. It was memory. She was teaching herself to survive through sound, to let her grief vibrate in the spaces where she could no longer live. Over time, those vibrations became more than echoes. They became a kind of blueprint. And when her body was finally laid to rest, something in that pattern, her rhythm, her voice, her unfinished sentence, lingered, waiting, listening. More than a century later, when digital frequencies began to pulse through the world, those same patterns reappeared, faint, buried within radio static, hospital monitors, and later, data packets. They carried her rhythm, 72 beats per minute, the rhythm of a resting human heart, the rhythm of Catherine Campbell. Scientists dismissed it as coincidence, interference from early transmission systems. But every time her name was spoken, in reports, in documentaries, in whispers, that same frequency emerged somewhere new, as if history itself was replaying her pulse through the machinery of human progress. And maybe that's what Catherine became, not a ghost, not a curse, but a memory too powerful to die, a vibration that outlasted flesh, that transformed grief into code, silence into resonance. She was never meant to haunt. She was meant to continue the only way she knew how, through the world's ceaseless hum. So when people today claim to hear faint singing in their speakers at night, or when an old radio catches a female voice repeating a wordless tune, maybe it isn't interference. Maybe it's Catherine Campbell, still asking the same question she began with. Can you hear me now? Because love, once broken by death, will always find a new medium to speak through. And perhaps the dead don't haunt us out of anger or vengeance. Perhaps they haunt us because they are still trying to finish the conversation we were too afraid to start. The story of Catherine Campbell, the girl who spoke in another world's tongue, who turned silence into legacy, reminds us that even the forgotten can find a way to endure. Her rhythm remains. In circuits, in songs, in static. And maybe, if you listen close enough right now, you'll hear her too.